a overview of the American Revolution. Shared my screen here. Fighting started Lexington conquered April 19th, 1775, and the colonists were shooting from behind rocks, and anytime they directly met the British, they were quickly repulsed. But by the time they were able to kind of push the British back into Boston, which East Boston's basically an island here in Boston Harbor, and they were able to keep them there for a good part of a year, from 1775 through the spring of 1776. And there was a battle at Bunker Hill. The British realized they needed to get the high ground north of the city, and they lost a lot of soldiers attempting to do this, 1,000 troops, a lot of officers, and the Americans kind of maintained the rest of the surrounding territory, able to take Dorchester Heights. They got the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga, brought them down, were able to fire into Boston. General Howe is forced to retreat, and he goes up to Nova Scotia, where he kind of regroups, and in the late summer of 1776, they come in to take Staten Island pretty easily. From Staten Island, they attack Long Island and had an overwhelming force. Were able to defeat Washington fairly easily in New York. Long Island pushed the Continentals into Manhattan, and at the battles Brooklyn Heights and White Plains, again, Americans were pushed out of New York and forced to retreat through New Jersey in the fall of 1777. Fall of 1776. They get into that from the Pennsylvania border. They retreat into Pennsylvania. They cross into Trenton, and in the late 1776, December 1776, on Christmas Day, they surprised the Hessians at Trenton. Early 1777, they go up and they take Princeton, and they winter in Morristown in the winter of 1777, and they stay there. And because Howe is so, his orders were to go help kind of block off, take New England, separate New England from the middle colonies by Burgoyne coming from Canada and him coming up from New York. They were going to kind of separate New England from the the middle colonies, but instead Howe heads south and comes up the Chesapeake to attack Philadelphia at Brandywine and Germantown. Both were victories. Howe takes Philadelphia, but as a consequence, General Burgoyne is kind of left to his own devices here in upstate New York, and is defeated by Horatio Gates. Horatio Gates had the benefit of having some Benedict Arnold and other good officers, good generals, who were able to defeat the British in a series of battles there in upstate New York. Meanwhile, Howe forces Washington to retreat to winter quarters at Valley Forge in winter, and so he winters there in 1777, 1778. It was a low point for the early part of the winter. Was a low point for the Continental Army, just because they had suffered these defeats outside Philadelphia, and they didn't have enough food and didn't have enough clothing supplies to really support themselves in outside Philadelphia, but the benefit, they have General Baron von Steuben joins in February of 1778, kind of remakes the military, remakes the army, trains the soldiers, and he's able to make the Continental Army much more professional in the winter of 1778 at Valley Forge, when General Howe is replaced by General Clinton, and Clinton withdraws. They're afraid of being kind of bottled up here in Philadelphia, so they are retreat back to New York, and in the process of doing so, kind of do it really slowly and kind of draw George Washington into a fight at Monmouth Courthouse. It's it was a draw between the two forces. The Americans, forced the British to continue their withdrawal, and they head back to New York. So that there was kind of a pause in the fighting there, and the end of 1778. Nothing of significance in 1779 as far as fighting goes, but the war continues in 1780, heads south, and the British are fairly easily take Charleston, May of 1780, spring of 1780. Serious rout of Horatio Gates at Camden in August of 1780. Also, the two victories for the Americans at Cowpens and Kings Mountain in winters of 1780 or 1781 and the fall of 1780. Cornwallis wants to head north to attack Virginia, and he worked his way across North Carolina and Virginia. He was the entire time he was being attacked by Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. The kind of hit and run tactics were extremely effective, just frustrating the British. They could never really catch Francis Marion, and what happened is that Cornwallis was kind of forced to kind of regroup. He had to retreat to Yorktown to be resupplied, but while he was waiting there at Yorktown, the French de Grasse came in and trapped him there at Yorktown, and he wasn't able to get resupplied. Lafayette came from the north, and Greene and General Nathaniel Greene came in from the south and up the York River, and was able to trap Cornwallis at Yorktown. And at that point, he had a 8,000 man army at that point, was forced to, all those troops were forced to surrender. And at that point, the British couldn't continue to fight it. It had been 6.5 years at that point of fighting, and they just couldn't afford to keep pushing this along with really no gains at all for the entire, really anything to show for their efforts during this period. And they were forced to surrender. And we got at the Treaty of Paris, 1783 Treaty of Paris, America borders were set between us and Canada. Americans were able to travel beyond the Appalachian Mountains west, and Spain got Florida back, and America was given its independence. So that is the overview of the American Revolution, and I hope you were able to learn something.